Hi everybody, it's Lisa again from Texas One Step Hikes the AT. Welcome back. I appreciate that you're here, and I am sharing some of the lessons learned from my 2023 Smokies Shakedown Hike. I did this hike in August, and I have some videos out there of, the 6 days of the hike. And so you can always go out there and check those out if you want. They're not the best videos ever, but again, I think I'm learning and improving on how I'm doing the videos as I go. But back to my lessons learned. I did decide to use the Smokies as my shakedown hike because I felt like it would be a true test of my equipment. It's kind of remote, and you can't, once you're a day in, you're a day out. Once you're 2 days in, you're 2 days out. In other words, once you're in, and it's not easy to get out. The first thing I learned, and you hear this all the time, but I guess, it has taken me some years to figure it out, and I really learned it on this trip, and that is don't plan big miles early. The Smokies are a little bit more difficult to play with how much you're planning, particularly for section backpackers, because you have to stay at shelters or designated campsites along the AT, and that is just they're not always spaced well. And I always think I can do more than I really can in the beginning, so that's a big lesson for me. The first day I ended up doing I think around 11.5 miles with almost a 3,000 foot gain. So that was way too much for my first day on trail. I learned a lesson with that one, so I'll talk about that a little bit more. But don't plan big miles early, and even if you do plan big miles early, listen to your body and stop if you need to stop sooner. So my number 2 is plan each day, which I've always done, and be aware of your surroundings. So, know where your water sources, shelters, accessible roads, resupply stops, etc. are, in general, at least, and know generally which thru-hikers are around you. If you're aware of your surroundings and you're planning each day, that's just going to help you make sure that you're successful in achieving your goals. But this leads us into number 3, which ties back to number 1, and that is listen to your body, pay attention to the weather, and be willing to change your plans if necessary. So I did end up having to do that when I was in the Smokies because my first day was such a big day. And initially on days 2 and 3, when I really, really struggled, I was having a hard time. I was weak, I was shaky. I've never had that happen on trail before. So that kind of threw me off. I thought it was because day 2 was just a really hard day with elevation. Turns out after I finished the trail and I've really figured up each day and the elevation gain and the miles and all that, the second and third day elevation gains were nothing like the first day. And so I realized that I had really overdid it on the first day, which then impacted me for the next couple of days. So just be careful about that, and be willing to change your plans. If you're going along and you think that everything's okay, make sure you stop where you plan to stop, and stop early if you need to. The 4th thing I learned, and you hear this all the time too, is the trail will provide. This really happened for me and for someone else on my second day. I didn't talk about this in my videos, but on that second day, I was actually supposed to be backpacking with a partner in the Smokies on the Shakedown hike, but she had done the whole trail before. She was in super good shape because she's retired and she works out all the time. Whereas I was coming into this trip having practiced and tried to be in shape, but having worked 45 hours a week, for months, and just being able to do little bits of practice. So I wasn't nearly in as good a shape as she was. And so we had our planned stops, but on day 2, I was supposed to do another 12.1 miles, and I wasn't even a couple of miles in, and I was really, really struggling and knowing that this was not going to be a good option for me. So I checked my Far Out app and saw where the next shelter was, next two shelters actually, and thought I could target the second shelter. So I called the ranger station, because in the Smokies you have to let them know where you're staying, let them know the situation, worked it out with them, and then I only went 6 miles instead of the 12.1. And the whole time I was really beating myself up about, letting my friend down. I did text her as well and let her know that I wasn't going to make it, and she was already almost there by the time I texted her. And I was just beating myself up and thinking, you really should be able to do this. And, and also, why did you plan such big miles when you didn't have to? That kind of thing. But then finally, when I was probably, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile from the shelter that I was going to stay at that night, I just said, you know what? You listened to your body, you did the right thing. So just move on and make this a lesson learned as far as making sure that I eat plenty of calories, which we'll talk about later too, and not overplan my days. So when I say the trail will provide, I looked up. I was also worried about not having someone at the shelter with me. I wasn't ready to be by myself that night, but I knew I might have to. And I was concerned about that and not really thrilled about it. And then I looked up and I saw a little boy walking on the trail by himself. He had a backpack on, and it turned out that little boy had overshot the shelter where he was supposed to go, and he and his family were camping in the Smokies and doing some Smokies camping, but not necessarily Appalachian Trail camping, and he had gotten a little lost. So it turns out that his family was staying or planning to stay at the shelter on the AT where I was headed, and I was able to get him to that shelter, and they were just about to send a search party out. So when I say the trail will provide, that little boy ran up on me and I ran up on him right when we both needed it. He was about to really lose it. And so he calmed down after, he knew he was safe, because I would make sure that he got where he needed to go or that we got help. And then I got to that shelter, and not only was his family there, but there were a couple of ridge runners there from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy who were out to educate people and work on the shelter. And so I had several people there. So the trail provides, and we just have to remind ourselves of that. Fifth thing that I learned is not to align myself so tightly with someone that I feel like I have to hike their pace or go to where they're going just because I need a companion. I figured out I can hike my own hike. I'm going to be okay. And then I have to be okay with the decisions that I made. Sixth thing I learned, which ties back to not planning too many miles and that kind of thing, is to make sure that you eat enough calories every day. And also, of course, drink the water with electrolytes and so on. But I think I still would have been okay on days 2 and 3, even though I had big miles. But I did not eat nearly enough calories for that workout that I got on day 1, not even close. And so I think that's why I was shaky and weak on day 2 especially, but a little bit on day 3 as well. So make sure that you're eating enough calories for the exertion that you're putting out. And you hear that all the time. And I've heard it. My son has said it to me when we were backpacking together at different places, but it just didn't strike me that day, that first day, that I really was not eating enough. And so I will be more mindful of that in future on my long trip. Another one I learned was I always take at least one method of filtering my water or purifying my water. But one of the things that my companion taught me was I should always have two systems, even three. So from now on, for me, I will have my filter system. I will also have a Sterapen as a backup, and then as just, emergency would be the tablets. Eighth thing I learned was to know your equipment really well before you start the trail. There were things that I didn't know about my new equipment because I hadn't really had time to practice or anything with them even before this Shakedown Hike, which is a smaller version of the trail of the thru hike. But for instance, I didn't know, I'd never had a blow up mattress before. And the whole time I thought I had already pricked a hole in it because it kept, by the morning, would be flat. And I really couldn't figure that out. And then when I got back and decided to go on overnight to test my cold gear equipment, I went ahead and tried it again and realized I hadn't been shutting it properly. So it was leaking. Also the tent, really make sure you know your tent, because there are things about it that, like, I really love my tent now. It was a newer tent, ultralight, and I kept getting a little bit of condensation and water in my tent, and I didn't understand why. And then I had someone show me some of the lines that you pull out that I didn't realize needed to be pulled out to make sure that the rainfly wasn't touching my tent, because then it would get condensation. So had I known that, I wouldn't have run into that problem. I also learned that my new cook system, which was an MSR rocket pocket, uses more fuel than my previous cook system, which was a jet boil. But I think I'm still going to use the pocket rocket because I feel like I can do more things with it. It's a little more versatile than the jet boil, although I loved my jet boil. I'm also going to consider a bear canister over a bear hanging system, really from one of the thru hikers that I was watching who it was hiking with Nat this year. That was a great thru hike to watch. It was a woman and her mother who hiked together, and the younger woman had I believe her name, let's see, Daisy was the mother. I forget the younger woman's name, the trail name. Anyway, the younger woman threw a bear bag every night. Just found it, did it, it was a thing. But the mom said she knew she was going to be too tired at the end of the day to be worrying about finding the right tree and getting a bear bag and all that. So she took a bear canister. And I've been always using a bear bag because I didn't want the extra weight and bulk in my pack. But I think, knowing myself the way I know myself, and at the end of the day when I'm exhausted and all I want to do is, get my tent set up and eat dinner and get in for the day, I think I like the idea of not having to worry about a bear hang. And then this isn't really a lesson I learned on this trip, although I will say I think it was heightened more on this trip, and that is to enjoy your limited time that you're out there. Because even when I was struggling, I was so grateful to be there because I knew that I was getting ready for my big trip. And I was so grateful that I was out there and doing this, even though I was weak and shaky and scared at times and, whatever, different things going on. I kept that as kind of like my base, that I was just so excited to be out there. And it made this trip probably one of the best trips that I've had. So that's important to remember, that it's a blessing that we're out there at all. And so many people don't get to do this. And then the biggest lesson that I took away was I can do this. I kept saying I could do it before. I thought I could do it. But this trip, this Shakedown hike, made me know I can do this. As most of you probably already know, there's only about a 25% success rate. And I always had that in the back of my head. And now I just know I can do it. I did stuff by myself. I listened to my body. I did the things that I need to do. And barring, some trip-ending injury or something like that, I can do this. So I'm so excited about that. Thanks for listening to me on this lessons learned video. I hope I didn't ramble too much, and I'm looking really forward to sharing my journey with all of you who care to watch me. So if you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'm putting out probably a video or two a month until I go, which I start my trail videos releasing in April. So anyway, thanks so much, and I'll look forward to taking this trip with you.